Shara from Woodshop Diaries, and today I'm going to bring you a little bit different video than my typical one project video. Today I want to be sharing with you 3 separate projects, all super simple and made from some scrap wood. First up, I'll show you how to make this super easy blanket ladder from just some 2x2s and some dowel rods. Then I'll show you how to make this wooden, life-size ruler. And then I'll talk about this super easy keepsake box that's got a little optional divider in the middle so you can separate notes, letters, keepsakes, etc. These 3 projects make great gift ideas, so if you're looking to get a head start on Christmas gifts, here you go. And also, if you're just looking to kill some time on a weekend, these are super easy weekend projects as well. So I hope you guys enjoyed this little out of the box video, and if you're ready to get building, let's go. Let's kick things off with my favorite of the 3 projects, this super simple blanket ladder. Now this would make an excellent gift for Christmas or just like a housewarming present if you don't want to spend a lot of money. All you need is a couple of 2x2s and some dowel rods.
Because this project is very basic and is fairly small, this is a great time to dig out some 2x2s that you may have deemed inadequate for a nicer project. So like if you have a slightly twisted, bowed, or just a not very pretty 2x2 laying around, this is a great way to actually put them to good use in an application where those issues aren't really critical. You can use any size dowel that you might have on hand between about a 1/2 inch and 1.25 inches. I had some leftover 3/4 inch diameter dowels from the floor bed that I built recently, so that's what I used here. All you need for this project is a saw. Any saw that can cut straight lines would work fine, a drill, a Forstner bit, the same size diameter as the dowels you're using, and some wood glue. I trimmed my 2x2s down to about 60 inches long for this. If you wanted a taller ladder, you can definitely cut them longer. Then I laid them out on the workbench and made a mark every foot down the length of the boards because this is where I'll put the dowel rungs.
I just laid this out. I don't have any specific angles. Basically what I've got is I've got about 12 inches at the top here, at the top mark, and then if I move this down, it's about 14.25. So that's 2.25 inches longer. So I'll just verify that it is the rest of the way down. That's 16.5. So that's another 2.25 inches longer. This is 18.75, which is another 2.25 inches longer. So every rung is 2.25 inches longer than the one before it.
I cut these 4 dowel rungs at 12 inches, 14.25, 16.5, and 18.75 inches long.
Now I know that I did not measure any angles here, but what I am going to do is figure out what the difference is from the top to the bottom. So this is 13 and this, it's almost 24. So 24 at the bottom minus 13 at the top is 11. So if we divide 11 by 2, then we would get that the difference between here and here, this should be about 5.5 inches. So what I'm going to do is prop this end up on a 5.5 inch block and drill my holes.
I stacked some scrap blocks up about 5.5 inches high and laid the end of the 2x2 on it. I used a Cricut multi-mark tool to mark a center line down the 2x2 and then marked out my dowel locations every 12 inches on this line. I used a Forstner bit in my drill to drill these holes about 3/8 inches deep. I tried to keep the drill as straight down as possible. Now, ideally in an application like this, you'd have a drill press that could drill perfectly straight down, but there's enough wiggle room here in this project that it doesn't have to be perfect. I repeated this process for the second side, and then I used some wood glue to glue in the dowels between each 2x2. I lightly clamped the sides together. You could also use tape to hold it or a ratchet strap. And I puttied the bottom because I wanted a smooth surface to paint. This part is totally optional and you can customize your colors and your finish however you want. But I just let this putty dry, sanded it well, and then I used some painter's tape and black spray paint to give it a 2-tone / dipped like finish. Once it was dry, it was ready for use. What I love about this project is that it's a great outlet for otherwise quote-unquote unusable pieces, and it's really easy to customize size and spacing without having to do any complicated math or requires any fancy tools. Now, before we move on to the next project, I would like to take a minute to introduce you to our video sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for creators on topics like illustration, design, photography, video, freelancing, and more. I've had several people ask me lately about how to get started with their own creative online business, and if that's you, Skillshare is a great resource. They offer classes about creating engaging video content for platforms like YouTube and TikTok, photography and editing tricks, and how to level up your creative writing skills. I recently watched Marcus Brownlee's YouTube Success Script, Shoot, and Edit class, and it was really helpful learning how he got started with his YouTube channel and how he plans out his script, visuals, and storyboard for his videos. If you're interested in getting started, the first 1,000 people to click the link in the description will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare, so you can start exploring today. Now, let's get back to the builds.
If you or someone you know needs a life-size ruler, I'll show you how to build that with just a scrap piece of plywood or scrap board of any size. It's gotta be 6 foot on my tiptoes, right? Not even close.
For this project, all you need is a single board. It can be scrap plywood, a 1x6, 1x8, whatever. I used a piece of 3/4 inch plywood that was about 7 inches wide. You can make this however tall you want, but I cut mine down to about 78 inches or 6.5 foot long. Because I was using plywood, I edge banded the sides, but if you're using a solid board or you don't mind seeing the edges, this step is totally optional. Now for the ruler marks, I was going to use a stencil and paint them on. So I gave it a few coats of poly beforehand, but I could have waited and polyed after the fact. However, if you want to stain or paint the board, it's best to go ahead and do that before. For the stencil, there are a ton of options. You can cut your own stencils from paper, purchase pre-made stencils, or if you're good at freehand, you can simply hand paint the lines and numbers. I'm not good at any of the above, so for this, I used my Cricut Joy machine to cut a vinyl stencil. Software allowed me to perfectly space all the lines with the ruler on the sides so they're accurate, but it would only cut a design up to 48 inches long, so I had to print out 2 of these and piece them together. I cut out my lines and numbers on some adhesive-backed vinyl. Since I was going to be painting, I didn't care what color that I used for this. However, you could actually use the vinyl sticker instead of painting, so if you did that, you would want to use whatever color vinyl that you wanted your lines and numbers to be. Once it was all cut out, I removed the parts that I was planning to paint. Then I used some transfer tape to transfer the vinyl to the board. I made sure that I started the first line about 1.5 inches from the bottom edge because all of these lines are supposed to be spaced 1.5 inches on center. Then I pulled the backer off and smoothed it out onto the board. When I got to the end of the 48-inch piece, I repeated with the second part, making sure to keep the spacing the same. Then I simply removed the transfer tape from the top of the stencil. I cut and applied the numbers the same way, and then I used painter's tape to cover over any exposed wood that I didn't want to get paint on. Of course, you could have totally skipped the paint altogether and done this opposite from how I did it by transferring the lines and numbers to the board instead of the stencil. I was just concerned that if it was touched or handled a lot, that it might peel off over time, so that's why I used paint. I took it to the yard and gave it a good coat of matte black spray paint and let it dry well. Then I removed the stencil and it was complete. I really hope you guys enjoyed this super easy and fun project.
And last but not least, I'll show you how to make a super simple keepsake box that you can keep notes, letters, little trinkets, or whatever inside from just some scrap plywood, some shims, and whatever else that you might can find around your shop.
For this keepsake box, I ventured over to my out-of-control scrap plywood pile and pondered life for a moment. Then I dug in and found some pieces that I could use for the 4 sides, the bottom, and the top of this box. I trimmed down my box sides on the miter saw. Now you can make this simple little box whatever size you wish, but I ended up making mine about 6 3/4 inches tall, 7 inches wide, and 11 3/4 inches long. Once I had my box sides cut down, I applied edge banding to the top edges. Now you could also add edge banding to the sides of the pieces as well, but I added some scrap wood shims to cover the plywood edges up later. There are 1,000 ways to go about making a simple box. Once the top edges were covered, I used some wood glue and brad nailed the box together. You could also use screws, dowels, or miter the corner and use splines, or even a more complex joinery method as well if you wanted. I originally intended to add the bottom piece in here a totally different way, but then I changed my mind. So this bottom panel would have been easier to install before adding the last side piece of the box, but it was already assembled when I changed my mind. So I just applied some wood glue along the edges, tapped it in place, and used brad nails to secure it. I was building this box to keep little notes, cards, and letters in, so it won't really be subject to a lot of weight on the bottom anyway. I was actually making this for a friend, and she asked to add a divider in the middle to separate the box into 2 compartments. If you had a table saw, you could cut dados to install a divider, or you could use a router as well. However, I wanted to show a simple way to make this without using additional tools, so I used some of my scrap 1/4-inch plywood and cut 4 pieces to line the inside of the box with. The inside of the box was 10 1/4 inches wide, so I cut 4 pieces of 5-inch square plywood to line the sides. That would leave a 1/4 inch gap in the middle to slide a piece of 1/4 inch plywood down into as the divider. This way, it's easily removable, no extra tools required, and it still looks nice and clean. I simply glued and clamped these pieces in place and cut a divider to fit. Now I focused on covering up these plywood edges. You could easily just apply some iron-on edge banding, but I had some thin poplar shims that I cut off some furniture legs that I made a while back. So I used these and just added some detail and covered up the ugly. I simply cut these to fit over the front and back sides and glued them in place. You could also use some thin lattice here, some actual shims, or opt for a thicker material and use some 1x scraps. Again, there are a million ways to go about doing this. You'll also notice that I went back and edge banded the bottom edges of this box because the exposed plies were just starting to get on my nerves. Once the box was trimmed out, the last piece to add was a lid. My friend requested that this lid simply lift off and have a finger hole to open it. I found an oversized piece to use for the lid and drilled out the hole first. I didn't want any tear out here, so I drilled partially through the lid until the middle point came out the other end, and then I flipped it over and finished drilling. This kept the edges nice and clean. Once the hole was drilled, I trimmed it down to fit, applied edge banding, and dropped it in place. This lid will rest on the tops of the inside lining so that it's slightly below flush across the top. You could add a hinged lid here instead, trim out the lid to match the sides, or get all kinds of creative with this. This is just one super simple idea to get those creative juices flowing. I gave this box a couple coats of clear coat and it's ready to fill with treasures. So I know this video is quite different than my usual videos, and I really hope that you enjoyed watching these 3 easy scrapwood projects come to life. I hope it gives you some ideas of things that maybe you can create from your own pile. If you want to stay up to date on all of the latest projects and videos, I'd love if you'd subscribe and follow along. I have tons more furniture projects coming your way soon, I promise. Thanks so much for watching, friends, and until next time, happy building!